For those that are here, let's take 1 second and pull out your program, okay? You know, when you come to a major APTA conference, there are 5,000 committee meetings and you have trouble making sense of it and getting a flow, but when you come to just the high-speed rail committee where we do a policy forum, there is supposed to be, I'm not sure if it's apparent when you look at the program, but there's supposed to be some art to this. It's kind of like building a pyramid where you start from the bottom with data, which Mike Alexander did this morning, to let us know that over time trends look like mega regions in America more closely resembling Europe and Asia. So we follow that up with bringing some of our UIC friends to tell us what their success stories in Europe and Asia are. We have projects that are along the mega region lines that show you here are the most promising projects in America, right? Then we have lunch with a couple of experts, including the deputy of FRA, talking about where the US government is. And then we go to one of the key elements of any advocacy program is what is it that you're doing that's going to save the planet that we all inhabit. So last, Jeff's panel was terrific for that. And so we're putting together this toolbox that hopefully will lead to effective advocacy. And one of the key things in a free and democratic and capitalist society, which we still are, is where is business in all this? What's the business model? What's the business interest? And how does that come into play with what we're trying to accomplish overall? So for that, we turn to one of our experts. Karen Hedlund needs no introduction to anybody here, but she can introduce her panel.
Picking up with a point that was made in the last session, at my recent 80th birthday, my daughter-in-law nominated me as an honorary millennial. She said, well, Mom, it's because, first of all, you live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which, for those of you who are not from the East Coast, this is where all the hipsters in New York live. It's the hottest place to live in New York. Number two, I've had 6 jobs. Which I guess most millennials have had. It's taken me a little longer to get 6 jobs, but I could never hold one down. I'm always working on 6 projects. One of them is for Facebook. Another is for Microsoft. And the last one was that at the time I was pursuing a long-distance relationship with an older man, but I lost points because I didn't find him on a dating site. So with that being said, what I think is one of the most interesting developments in the last couple of years is to see the emergence of companies like Facebook and Microsoft coming to the fore as primary advocates for high-speed rail and intercity and transit in our communities. I had the privilege of working on the recent study that was published this summer, looking at making the business case for high-speed rail that would connect Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia, and Seattle, and Portland, I was in one meeting kind of taken up short with a comment that I made by the Secretary of Transportation of the state of Washington. I made the comment, and of course it will, help relieve the terrible congestion on I-5. And he said, Karen, that's not what this project is all about. It's about economic development. And so this is what we're going to talk about for the next half hour. And I've brought together a group of people from kind of all sides of the business community. I've got Paige Malott here, who is from the Cascadia region. She also represents and talks to millennials, so as you may know. And she's chair of something called Cascadia Rail, which is a major booster of high-speed rail in the region, and she talks to small businesses as well as big ones, and young people as well as old people. Winston Bowen over here from Facebook, and Winston heads up the transportation strategy for Facebook. She has a deep history in the transportation arena. She was, I think, with AECOM and worked in Miami and other parts of Florida on transportation. She's now in Silicon Valley. And then Nicole Bruin. And Nicole is Vice President for Government Relations for the Railway Supply Institute. So her organization represents all of the companies that build stuff for railroads, not just the big equipment manufacturers, but the people that make components and steel and frogs and that kind of thing. And lastly, I've got Jeff Joins, excuse me, and Jeff represents labor. He's the Assistant National Director of the Brotherhood of Railroad Maintenance of Way Workers, and he's here in the place of his boss, Charlie Hogue, who had an emergency today and couldn't be with us. But we're really grateful to Jeff for stepping in. So what we would like to do is have each of these folks talk about high-speed rail, the future of rail, high-performance rail from their unique perspectives to round out this conversation about why business wants high-speed rail. We're going to start with my client, Jeff Hensley, from the great state of Washington, who's looking a little sleepy-eyed at the moment, but he recorded this nice little spot for us. He's a great proponent of high-speed rail, and obviously a great proponent, as we all know, of dealing with climate change, and sees high-speed rail as a primary instrument for addressing that issue. I think he's one of my favorite ex-presidential candidates. He may have been more effective as an ex-presidential candidate than as a candidate himself. So go ahead.
I'm Governor Jay Inslee, and I am pleased to join you by video to share a few words
Can we get the
high-speed rail and our efforts to bring it to reality here in
sound up a little better?
You know, high-speed rail is the missing link for those distances between major cities that are really too short to fly and too long to drive. And Europe and Asia figured this out a long time ago. Japan has had this technology for over 50 years. And now have a bullet train museum in Tokyo. The United States has been slower to adapt, but there are encouraging signals, and the looming threat of climate change is driving us to quick action. Here in Washington State, we're envisioning trains connecting Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, BCs at speeds as high as 250 miles an hour. Working with Microsoft, we've conducted studies that show we have the critical mass of a growing population, the muscle mass of one of the fastest growing economies in the U.S., and the traffic congestion to really justify an ultra-speed high corridor. So as a next step, we'll be creating a governance plan and doing a deeper dive into financing options that might attract investors. And we look forward to engaging with you as this project moves forward. I often say a bridge or a train is a monument to optimism. It's the ultimate expression of belief in ourselves and the growth potential of our communities. And it's the belief that the future is going to be bright. So I've ridden these trains. I would like to ride them here in Washington State. So thank you for all you're doing to make high-speed rail a reality, and good luck with the conference. I'll see you on the tracks.
Thank you, Governor. I really appreciate it. His willingness to do that. To kick us off, I think we're going to start with Nicole. And Nicole, as I mentioned, is from the Railway Supply Institute. She's also a member of the Coalition for the Northeast Corridor, which is a group of businesses that are supporting further development and investment in the Northeast Corridor. And I found her work and that of her institute extremely helpful when during a meeting I had recently, it was a conference up in Seattle, and some folks said, yeah, but how are we going to get people in eastern Washington and eastern Oregon to support rail when they don't use it? And I quickly pulled up a map that you're going to see and found two companies that make equipment for the railroads in those areas that will benefit from it. And so that, we can use this to sell the benefits of rail far outside the corridors that they will service.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Karen mentioned, my name is Nicole Bruin. I am the Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for the Railway Supply Institute. RSI is a trade association that represents all suppliers to the freight railroads and passenger railroads and transit authorities. So what that means exactly is our members are made up of the locomotive freight car builders, passenger car builders, all of their component suppliers, maintenance of way equipment, and communication and signaling. So we really run the whole spectrum, and we have a little over 250 members. And essentially, we have four, I would say, this Congress and many Congresses before, I would say that we have been stalwart champions of a dedicated, predictable source of funding for intercity passenger rail and transit. This has been at the very core of our mission for some time, as well as our other activities that, center upon rail supply specific issues, and then, of course, the freight railroads as well, many of which you are familiar with. But for this group, I'd like to just focus on our main concern about continuing to find support and basically ways that we can continue to finance rail in this country, especially where there's a public benefit. So one thing that we had learned a long time ago, especially with the changing of the makeup of Congress, with the administrations, is that Republicans said, yeah, we understand why you want Amtrak to succeed. We get that. But what does it mean for my constituency that has absolutely no Amtrak service that goes through my county or my state or my city? And we said, good point, well taken. So we went back and looked at our membership, and we said, wow, we have a lot of member companies that exist in places that do not have railroad right-of-ways, but we need to tell that story about why there's economic value, why they provide economic value, why they're providing jobs, why they're part of the story about why we need to continue to have investment in passenger rail. So, if you can.
Maybe you can do it with that black thing to your.
Okay, let's see if this works. There we go. So what we did is we went back and basically mapped out where we have member facilities. And what we found was we have 725 facilities in 46 states and 273 congressional districts. And as you can see, it's pretty much almost in every state. Some in areas that you would suspect are a little bit more congested, but that tells a pretty compelling story when you bring that into a congressional office and they can see. And what we have done is we've actually taken this map, and if you go onto our website, which is rsiweb.org, you can actually see this as an interactive map. So you can actually click on the state and go right down into the congressional district for that particular state, and you can see the number of rail supply companies and who they are and what they do. So this was what I call step one. And so step two for us was, well, we have this information. We know where the member companies are. We know the congressional districts that we need to be talking to to make them understand why rail is so important and how it ties into the bigger picture. But what we can't tell them is how many jobs are in their state? What's the economic impact? So RSI, along with three other organizations, supply organizations, RSSI, which is communication signaling, REMSA, which is maintenance of way, and then RTA, which is the Railway Tie Association, we all joined together and surveyed our membership through an economic firm called Oxford, where they sent in their information directly to Oxford, and Oxford compiled the information through a system. And this is what we came up with. And this was released in September 2018 under the title Tracking the Power of Rail Supply. And what we found out was that in total, The rail supply industry generated $74.2 billion in economic value nationwide. We directly employ over 125,000 people. Indirectly, that's 525,000 people, so close to 500,000 people. And the average salary is $78,800 a year, which is 40% above the national average. So those are really compelling numbers. What's even more compelling is that if you take the total number of direct rail supply jobs, we get really close to what the freight rail industry employs. And so that's a powerful lobbying group in its own state. So what this told us was we have a really great story here, and one that we can take back to these members of Congress to say, hey, this is why rail is important. We took it even a further step, and we actually broke it down by state. So we have all 50 states. Obviously, some states are bigger than others. The top 6 were Texas, California, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And all of this information is on our website. We plan to update this over the next probably 2 or 3 years, just to continue to make it fresh and usable, so that the information doesn't get stale. But I would say that we've got an incredible return on our investment with this study. It's, I think it resonates incredibly with members of Congress, their staff, and then we've shared it, with the states individually when we've had issues come up, whether it's freight related or passenger related. And it's been a very, very incredibly useful tool when debating and trying to weigh in and influence policy on rail. I think Karen wanted to really stress that, this, please, in your conversations and when you go back and think through these, and I liked what the gentleman before us said, is, the pyramid of having you thinking through these things as with toolkits, that this is part of your toolkit, because this is, real numbers where you can equate jobs directly related to investment in rail. So, and again, all of this information is on our website. It's rsiweb.org. And I will continue, RSI ourselves, through our passenger working group, will continue in our own right to work with the coalitions that we belong to and with APTA to continue to tell the story about rail and passenger rail and why it's so important to invest in. And looking forward to the surface bill about the policies that we think are important, moving forward, helping to move this country forward, especially when we're looking at ways to, write good policy and ways to continue to try and fund the policy itself, which is the biggest challenge I think we have right now.
Thank you, Nicole. There really isn't any more effective way to get to your congressman than to have the CEO of a company located in his district give him a call. It gets her attention really fast, and it makes them think about things maybe in a little different fashion than they might otherwise. The next person we're going to hear from is Paige, and Paige really understands what Mike Alexander was talking about this morning in terms of megaregions, because Cascadia is a megaregion. It's comprised of 2 major cities and 2 major states and a 3rd city in a foreign country. And if I had a bone to pick with Mike Alexander, is that his maps only included the United States. We have to be looking at Canada as well. And I've heard people in Washington say they feel that sometimes they have more in common with their folks across the border to the north than they do with, some of their friends to the south and to the east. And one of the things we did with this study was to interview businesses and talk to them about, what they think about high-speed rail. And what the business community told us is that they thought it would bring regional economic integration due to greater connectivity. They wanted to see access to a larger, more cohesive pool of qualified talent throughout the region. They want increased affordable housing opportunities and choice, a major issue in the Seattle area, just as it is in the Silicon Valley. Some of them talked about support for specialized freight movement in e-commerce and technology-based industries. There was a thought that maybe a high-speed rail line could be used for moving packages in the off hours between various communities in Seattle or Vancouver, which are major port cities. And then there was significant economic benefits to specific industries that were uniquely positioned to benefit, and this would include sports and entertainment industries. Something about hockey in the Northwest is a big deal, and the aviation and ocean transportation sectors, including the cruise ship industry. And Paige is going to talk a little bit about aviation and high-speed rail and how they can, how they view each other and how they can partner, how they're symbiotic rather than competitors. So, Paige.
So I wanted to say thank you for having me, Karen. And as the resident millennial here, I wanted to say that that if you're looking for ways to get more younger folks involved, invite them out to attend sessions like this with you. Think of 3 people in your office that would fall into the millennial category and bring them with you. Look for opportunities for them to speak and learn more about the topics, because inviting us in is a great way to keep us engaged and involved. I would like to say, you cannot be what you cannot see. So that's my challenge for y'all before the end of the year. Have those conversations. So if we could get the slide queued up here, we are going to skip through. They're there. Please follow us on social media because we are on there as a millennial organization. We're going to skip through to the best part, which is the meme from NumTot's website. Who here is familiar with what a meme is? Okay, so join the NumTots website for more cool pictures, maps, things like that. But this is a sampling of that. But aviation in Seattle, it's one of our main industries, but it's also a great asset for bringing talent into the region. We have about 30 flights per day between Seattle and Vancouver, and 30 flights per day between Seattle and Portland. And so we're looking at these regional flights. How many people, what's the demand for that, and what could high-speed rail do to alleviate that capacity and the congestion those regional flights are causing to open up more gates at the airport? We had a recent study come out, this happened just last month, it came out, where we are expanding SeaTac Airport. And our near-term expansions that we are doing to expand that capacity will be complete in 2027. However, we'll still be over capacity by 3 million passenger enplanements. By 2034, we will have completed all of our long-term expansions at SeaTac. That means we have maxed out our abilities to expand any further. A lot of that has to do with land constraints of where the airport is located. We'll have a total capacity of 33 million passenger enplanements, but just 3 years later, we'll be over capacity by nearly 7 million passenger enplanements. We're looking at having to build a second airport, even expanding Payne Field, which is located in Everett, about 30 miles to the north of Seattle. That's only adding a capacity of 600,000. So when we're looking at ways to move people around, high-speed rail is something that is going to definitely help address this situation. We're looking not only at the congestion on our roads for people commuting, but also for even getting people into the Pacific Northwest. So we need to look at high-speed rail as that option. Our current, our study says that our mode can move up to 32,000 people in an hour, which is about 6 times the capacity of what our highways move at the current, and I believe it's about 59 planes per hour can land on one runway, if we were to add that, which is about half the capacity if we're counting full 737s running on those airstrips. So we're still getting a bigger bang for our buck with high-speed rail. As mentioned earlier, we have the 30 flights per day between Seattle and Vancouver, 30 flights per day between Seattle and Portland. We're thinking about our climate goals too while we're considering expanding our transportation options. So earlier I'd asked about what climate emissions look like, what carbon emissions look like from air travel compared to rail. And this study shows that a flight from Seattle to Vancouver is 2.6 times less efficient than if you were to fly from Montreal to Miami. The greenhouse emissions per flight are equal to driving from Seattle to Boston and back again for each one of those flights. And the reason for that is because most of the fuel is used during the takeoff period. So if you're not going very far, then you're not having a very efficient trip. And to put in perspective of how close our cities are together, if you're at SeaTac Airport, you're already in the landing pattern before you leave to go to Vancouver. Now, if only there was some kind of mode we could invest in as an alternative to air travel. And so this is our vision for high-speed rail. So the current segment that is being studied is the alignment between Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. And you may notice that there are additional lines on this route. That is our advocacy group's vision for an entire complete system in the Pacific Northwest. So expanding that line down to Eugene, which was the original vision back in the 1990s, and also having connections at each of the airports along the north-south corridor to basically connect passengers who may be flying from across the country and then be able to transition onto a regional or onto a train instead of taking that regional flight, or absorb the regional air travel that's happening largely from our tech industry that's commuting between Vancouver and Seattle for the companies that are opening up offices in Vancouver. We have an expansion happening with Facebook and Amazon in Vancouver, and we're seeing a lot of talent going back and forth there for work. Looking further ahead at the east-west corridor, if we were able to expand this to Spokane, it's something that I think would really unite the state. For those of you not familiar with Washington politics, if you take Seattle out of the picture, we're basically Idaho. Where the rest of the state is fairly conservative. So when we're looking at how we can bring the prosperity and bring the opportunities that come with high-speed rail, and giving that access to Spokane and giving that access to the Yakima, Tri-Cities areas to the south. That's also our wine country. So folks that are coming in on the cruises are going down there on bus currently and doing tourism down there. But if they were able to take a high-speed train, they get a much more beautiful, efficient route through there. So that's our long-term vision, and also connecting the airport in there as well, hoping to get there faster than driving.
Thanks very much. Next up is Winston from Facebook. And I've had the privilege of working a little bit with Winston on the project that they are spearheading down in Silicon Valley to rebuild a rail connection across to the East Bay, across the old Dumbarton Bridge. Dumbarton's an old rail bridge. It was essentially abandoned by the rail owners, didn't need it anymore. It was purchased by the local transit agency, San Mateo Transit District, which is essentially a bus company, but they have this rail asset. And Facebook decided that maybe this was part of the solution to enabling them to really maintain a healthy employment base right where they are in their headquarters, but be able to access employees living elsewhere in the region. So,
thank you, Karen.
Winston, yeah.
So I'll just give you a little bit of background. You've seen a version of the Northern California Service Vision 2040 for rail in Brian's presentation early this morning. We use this just to demonstrate that this is part of a broader vision. It's not a one-off. The Dumbarton Rail Corridor is that green line that connects the future high-speed rail on the peninsula in blue, the Caltrain commuter rail in red, across to the East Bay to the Tri-Valley area. So a little bit of background. We have been funding some small, modestly sized feasibility studies for the owner for several years. And truthfully, these studies get us nowhere. It simply moves the cheese laterally instead of moving things forward. And the conversation started out as, well, we should use this dormant facility for a rails to trails conversion. And all of the enviros in California thought that was an excellent idea. All of the bike advocates just loved the thought. And the conversation started to elevate at the elected official level that perhaps this unused public asset needs to be used for something that can carry far more passengers as our freeways, the 101 freeway, becomes increasingly congested. Our local streets are so clogged that it can take you an hour to travel less than a mile. And this is not just because of tech or Silicon Valley or Facebook, contrary to popular belief. Facebook contributes to about 15% of the rush hour traffic. It's just that this is the southernmost crossing of the San Francisco Bay, and there is nothing else until you get to Northern California, Northern Bay, connecting San Francisco and Oakland. So this Dumbarton Rail Bridge actually is the very first crossing of the San Francisco Bay, opened in 1910. The bridge is in extreme disrepair. There have been 2 fires since the transit district took ownership. So it's unusable. It needs to be rebuilt, replaced and rebuilt. In the meantime, the highway bridge that is just north is extremely congested for about 6 hours a day, and we're just stuck in traffic. In the meantime, I can speak to the growth of employment at the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park. We have grown from 4 employees in 2007, and I think you know who 2 of the 4 are, to about 25,000 in the Bay Area. We anticipate that we're going to get to over 35,000 in the next 5 years, and that's maxing out on the density that we can build. So right up against the booming headquarters is this unused rail asset. And we thought that this may be a good opportunity to, rather than fund another feasibility study to the tune of $1 million or $2 million, which you know doesn't do anything, that we wanted to see how much more impactful our contribution could be to support the owner. And this is not intended to be a Facebook train, contrary to what the media have reported, because I think it makes for good headlines. This is a public asset operating in a public right-of-way for public use, public benefit, but funded with private resources. In 2018, we executed an agreement with the owner of the corridor, the San Mateo County Transit District, to have exclusive access for a given period of time to investigate the financial feasibility of doing this as a privately driven effort. We realize that despite the fact that there has been conversation, this corridor has been studied for a quarter century, 24 to 25 years. There's never been environmental clearance on this. And as you know, before we can turn one shovel in the ground, that's essential. So we're pursuing a joint state of California environmental document as well as a federal NEPA document, and moving that as quickly as we can. Our goal is to have this done in 18 months. And at the same time, we are doing our financial plan development, our funding plan. We're working with public and private sector entities to complete a robust funding plan. doing our ridership forecasts, and we'll be engaging in our ridership and revenue forecasts next year while the environmental document is underway. So we're doing everything all at once, mixed in one crazy blend of practitioners who are not accustomed to working with each other. So we have engineers who want greater definition. I have finance people who want absolute definition. And when we have the environmental technicians who are working on what it takes to permit this rebuilt rail bridge. It's roughly 18 miles of track that would start at the Redwood City Station, connecting with the electrified Caltrain and also with the future high-speed rail at Redwood City, running through Menlo Park. And the Willow Road Station that's shown in the East Palo Alto vicinity is also the site of an area that we have bought. We're going to be developing as slightly under 2 million square feet of mixed-use office and retail space with meeting space and neighborhood grocery stores, as well as 1,500 residential units, of which 15% will be reserved for below market. These are just rough numbers, so please don't quote me on this. Running across the bay to Newark, and in this region of the East Bay, it's called the Tri-Cities, to connect Newark to our growing campus presence in Ardenwood, to connect to Centerville, Fremont, to ACE, and also to Union City, which is a southern stop for BART. So we're working with Caltrain, ACE, Capital Corridor, and BART on more efficient connections. I know we would love to say that this would be a one-seat ride, but that, given the nature of the provision of passenger rail in the Bay Area, that's impossible because we have 27 operators in the area. So there is no long-distance one-seat ride concept in Northern California, unfortunately. It's our goal to have this completed and open to service by 2028. We're not sure yet what the funding plan will be. We're still developing the business case for private sector, but I just want to share with you what a more robust transportation network can mean to business. Facebook has decided to be a major private sector contributor to the construction of the 101 managed lanes, the Freeway 101 managed lane system, because our studies indicated that we can shave off 10 to 15 minutes of travel time for our engineering staff traveling on our city shuttles. That represents quite a bit of revenue for us because, as you may know, the engineers are the backbone of our business. We also operate a small transit agency, in effect, because we transport over 7,000 riders per day across a variety of modes. And we feel that our contribution to this larger regional rail, and we're not sure even if it's a rail because we're looking at alternative technology in order to make this more affordable, will help to move the economy forward, because we believe that every minute that our staff or anybody else in the Bay Area is stuck in traffic represents a ding on the economic livelihood of the region. So it's not that we're doing this just to put for benefit directly to Facebook, but we believe that our participation is critical as a critical part of the economic engine of the state of California. And it will also complement our contribution to the regional housing crisis. You may be aware through the media reports that we've recently contributed $1 billion, split 4 ways into 4 separate housing programs that we've been working through with the governor's office to facilitate the construction of various market levels of affordable and above housing. But we know that money alone is not going to do this, and we can't separate housing from transportation. So we see it as a necessary part of our contribution to the community.
Thank you very much. We're going to come back with some questions to all of you, but our last panelist here, you can't talk about business in the United States without talking about labor. And labor has been a tremendous advocate for high-speed rail. So Jeff Joins from the Brotherhood is here to give us his perspective and talk a little bit about his union. The thing about railroad jobs is most of them can't be outsourced.
And that's the way we like it. Thank you for having us, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our organization. In the golden age of railroad, which was between the 1900s and 1900 and the 48, somewhere around in there, 1 in 50 Americans worked on the railroad or for the railroad. Our organization at that time, we had about 450,000 people in the Brotherhood of Maintenance Away at that time. Now we have roughly around 36,000. And so you can see just by the numbers why we get excited about something like high-speed rail or passenger rail expanding across the country. You know, it gives us the opportunity to provide those jobs for our members, the good-paying jobs for our members, and that's what we do all across the country. Not just our organization, but several rail labor organizations in the last few years have started their own passenger rail division. I know our brother union in the Teamsters Rail Conference that we're in, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, they just started a passenger rail division. You know, the Teamsters Rail Conference, our passenger rail division, Dave Cameron, he's sitting right back there. So he's all over the country for us, advocating for high-speed rail, passenger rail, and labor being a part of that. So, you know, it's important not only for us, not our, I don't want to say our longevity, because we're going to be here just like you said, you know, but we offer opportunities or expanding of high-speed rail, passenger rail offers the opportunities for well-paying jobs, good middle-class jobs. And so some of the things that we're doing, sometimes it opens you up to odd relationships that necessarily you wouldn't have in a perfect world. But you know, we've reached out to different organizations, and we have one that we're proud to be a member of is are a member of Ray Chambers' organization, the Association of Independent Passenger Rail Operators, and have been working with Ray over the past several years with some of the passenger rail operators to put labor in those in the equation, so when you go to on the federal level or the state level that are taking over the small routes or something like that, that we're on the same page and we want this thing to work, you know. And so Ray and his organization, and we've endorsed it, has come up with a rail title that helps us get there. I think he has copies of those in the back, and if anybody wants any, you just raise your hand, Ray will send them to you. But just like Jim was talking about earlier, and like Ray was talking about earlier, we got to have a starting point. Where are we going to start at? Well, we think this is a good starting point, and if anybody wants to look at it, Ray's got copies, and so with that, I guess I'll just stop and we'll take some questions.
This is an opening draft. It has 4 companies, one of which is Herzog, which operates quite a bit on the Altamont computer.
Yep.
San Jose. 4 members plus labor. It's been endorsed by that group, but it's open to change. It's the idea of beginning to get a coalition underway, which is going to go to Capitol Hill and say we want something transformative. So.
Great.
was saying that
You're not on.
Well, I learned a long time ago when I went up against labor, we neutralized each other or I lost, generally the latter. Over time, we've come together with this association. We created the organization. The Brotherhood of Maintenance Away Teamsters is a very enthusiastic member. His boss, Charlie Hogue, who couldn't be here, is extremely active. And I think it's going to be powerful when Charlie and I and you go to the Hill, kind of arm in arm, and say, this is something we want, to some key Democrats and Republicans. But the important thing, as several of us have stressed, is to try to get something that's really transformative out there, and an actual proposal. And so we're open on this to ideas. I'll have to run it by my board, and they'll have to run it by theirs. But we would like to have other people come into this idea. And so we appreciate your comments, and we appreciate the opportunity to pass it out.
In the few minutes we have left, I want to just kick it off with this question. You're all major supporters of rail projects, the folks that you represent. Do you see them as ever becoming direct investors in rail projects? And I'm going to put our labor representative on the spot. I don't know if he's ever thought about it, but going back to my prior career, before I started working in transportation, I was doing alternative energy back in the 90s. And the Boilermakers Union was a major investor in some of these plants. And the Boilermakers obviously made power plants. So do you anticipate that the Teamsters Trust Fund would ever become an investor?
Well, that's way over my head. I can't tell you that right now. But I can tell you that our organization has been invested in the railroads for over 150 years with blood, sweat, and tears. And whenever an organization like this one or another one is banging on the door like we're doing now from high-speed rail, that you can count on labor to be there with you.
Great.
I don't think we had any clear vision of becoming investors in any kind of public infrastructure. But I know that one thing marks the tech industry sector is flexibility and openness and a willingness to take a risk. So that's where we are. We never intended to be a participant in providing for housing or being a part of that conversation. But as we expand our footprint, for example, in Dublin, affordable housing is becoming an issue, so we have to step up. It's the same thing with transportation. And the extent of our investment in public transportation is probably going to evolve over time. So whatever it is today, or whatever our CEO thinks he'd be comfortable investing today, is likely to change, because change is the backbone of our practice.
All right. Thank you.
Well, we haven't talked specifically on that point. I would say the supply industry is contributing currently with private dollars towards research and development and technology. So,
Thank you. Okay, questions from the room? Our friend from Spain.
Thank you. A question to Paige regarding the Cascadia Rail, this organization. I understand this kind of organization is very close to the community along the corridor, and you are dealing there with a potential new high-speed system or line. What is your feeling regarding the community along the corridor? The new system will bring a new option for passengers with a high performance, comfortable, reliable, safety, convenient rail service, but also will bring additional capacity for the freeway, reducing the congestion, and also will mean a new sustainable transportation mode. Which one out of these three should be the main driver for your community to support this new system?
That's a great question. And I think that depending on who you are and who your values are, is which one of those things is going to drive your support for the project. Just like we talked about earlier today, we're at different ages and different stages of life. There's different things that are important to you. I think with the Cascadia project, making decisions around our climate goals is something that is definitely on the forefront of our minds. The commute times and access to affordable housing is also huge, particularly when we're looking at the business and employment ecosystems, where businesses want to attract the best talent. They want employees to be able to access their businesses with short commutes and also be able to live and work where they want. So when we're looking at reducing, say, a 90-minute commute that people are looking at down to, say, 15 minutes with high-speed rail, that's life-changing. It would give people roughly a month of their time back each year. And I think that making those decisions and looking forward into what would really continue to attract the talent to our region and alleviate the problems not only for current employees, but also attracting future employees is something we have to think about.
Any other questions? I've got one for Winsome. You made the comment that you're not going to be able to achieve a one-seat ride around much of the Bay Area simply because of the nature of the other transportation modes that serve the arena. What does this say about your choice of technology for crossing the Bay?
So in a perfect world, I would love to say we can commit to electrified commuter rail so that we could essentially have the door open to a one-seat ride in the future between San Francisco and Menlo Park and all the way to Union City. The problem is the cost. The bridge is the long lead item. This reconstruction of a new bridge over San Francisco Bay is driving the capital cost of this project. And so we're looking for ways as private investors, private developers to reduce this cost. And we're thinking that it may be in alternative technology, and we may be wrong because we've done some initial studies that indicate that on the assumption of a maximum speed of 90 miles an hour over that railroad bridge, if we were operating electrified commuter rail, it actually could be a single-lane bridge and therefore reduce the cost of the construction by about a third. So we're still in the process. The transportation planner in me would like to see commuter rail, but then we have to think of the cost, especially since there is no source of funding for this project yet. Yet.
But yes.
So following up on that, Winsome, your professional instinct says let's create a connected system all the way from San Francisco, perhaps to Oakland, and a loop. And the reason you're backing away is money. Now, in the Bay Area, aren't the counties talking about a rather huge amount of collections, a new regional tax for transportation? And could not this project be put into that mix? I kind of, it just bothers me when I hear a transportation planner say, well, it should be this, but we don't have enough money, so we're going to make it one-lane rickshaws.
It's more than money, it's about politics.
Yes.
It's about politics. So to go back to my comment on the housing issue, all that fiscal contribution from tech, $1 billion from Google, $1 billion from us, 2.5 from Microsoft, it's not going to solve the housing problem, the affordability problem. It's politics. And there's Faster Bay Area that's in consideration, but we don't know if that's even going to make it through the state legislature to get on the ballot for 2020 because there's so much competition. There's also a strong belief that in Northern California, at least, we are overtaxed. So I don't know if there's really a stomach for yet another transportation tax. And that's a battle that's still to be fought, and we're just supporting in the background. So even if we had all the funding to build all of this future rail vision, Stan, I think for a one-seat ride, we would probably need to get really radical and dissolve some of those smaller rail providers or consolidate so that we can have greater efficiency in service delivery.
The Northern California Railroad Authority, NCRRA. There's one in the Southern California.
From your mouth, not mine.
It doesn't work. My mouth has said this so many times over 25 years. Never mind.
Okay. Anything else before we go on to our next panel? Well, I want to thank you all today for coming out and joining us. This was really interesting, and keep doing the good work.